On September 19, 1960, a CIA officer sitting inside the United States Embassy in Leopoldville, Congo, received a cable from CIA Director Allen Dulles that contained 11 words that would change the course of African history forever. Those 11 words were, "We wish to give every possible support in eliminating Lumumba." Eliminating, not removing from power. Not arresting, eliminating. The man they wanted eliminated was Patrice Lumumba, the first democratically elected Prime Minister of the Republic of Congo. He had been in office for exactly 67 days, and the authorization for his murder, according to documents that sat locked in classified archives for over 4 decades, came directly from the office of the President of the United States. No one was ever prosecuted. No one was ever charged. The man who gave the order died in office, and the country he ordered killed was left to burn for 60 years. This is the full documented story of Operation ZROSH Rifle, the CIA's classified assassination program, the presidential fingerprints left all over it, and the single piece of evidence that every official investigation tried to bury. To understand why a sitting U.S. president authorized a murder on foreign soil, you have to understand what Patrice Lumumba represented to Washington in the summer of 1960. Congo was not just any country. It held 60% of the world's known uranium deposits at the time, the same uranium that had built the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It held cobalt, industrial diamonds, and copper reserves that the entire Western industrial economy depended on. And in June 1960, after 80 years of Belgian colonial rule, it had just become independent. Lumumba stood up at that independence ceremony, with the Belgian king sitting 6 feet away from him, and delivered a speech that Washington read like a declaration of war. He told the Congolese people on live radio that their suffering under colonialism would never be forgotten. He said Congo's resources belonged to the Congolese people. He said Africa would rise. Within 48 hours, the CIA station in Leopoldville filed an emergency cable to Langley describing Lumumba as a, quote, Castro or worse. Within 2 weeks, the NSC had convened a special session on the Congo question. The question was not how to work with Lumumba. The question was how to get rid of him. Here is where the documented record gets uncomfortable, because the decision to move from political removal to physical elimination did not come from a rogue officer. It did not come from a mid-level bureaucrat acting alone. The Church Committee, the Senate investigation that first cracked open these files in 1975, traced the authorization chain all the way to the top. And the man at the top was President Dwight D. Eisenhower. The single most explosive document in the entire classified record is a set of National Security Council meeting minutes from August 18, 1960. According to testimony given to the Church Committee by Robert Johnson, the NSC staff note-taker present at that meeting, President Eisenhower turned to CIA Director Allen Dulles and said in explicit terms that Lumumba should be eliminated. Johnson testified under oath that the statement, quote, came across to me as an order for the assassination of Lumumba. He was the only non-cabinet official in the room. He spent 15 years deciding whether to say anything. Within 10 days of that meeting, CIA Director Allen Dulles sent the cable to the Congo station that ordered the, quote, elimination of Lumumba with, quote, high priority and full presidential authorization. But Dulles went further than a cable. He dispatched a man named Sidney Gottlieb to Leopoldville on a personal courier mission. Gottlieb was not a field officer. Gottlieb was the head of the CIA's Technical Services Division, the man who ran MKUltra, the mind control program. His specialty was untraceable methods. He carried with him, personally, on a commercial flight, a kit containing biological toxins designed to be introduced into Lumumba's food or toothpaste. The specific agent, according to the 1975 Church Committee report, was designed to induce a fatal illness that would look like a disease naturally prevalent in the Congo. They wanted to kill him. They wanted the kill to look like nature. The CIA station chief in Leopoldville at the time was Lawrence Devlin. His cables back to Langley, many of which were only fully declassified after 2007 through Belgian archive cross-referencing, show a man receiving explicit instructions and relaying them into operational planning with terrifying bureaucratic normalcy. One cable, referenced in the Belgian Commission report of 2001, described Devlin receiving confirmation that, quote, the highest authority had approved the operation. Devlin himself later admitted in his 2007 memoir that he understood the highest authority to mean the President of the United States. Here is where Operation ZR Rifle becomes something even more disturbing than a single assassination order, because ZR Rifle was not designed solely to kill Patrice Lumumba. ZR Rifle was a standing assassination infrastructure, a permanent program, a machinery of state-sanctioned murder that could be pointed at any target the president or director designated. Lumumba was its first operational deployment. The architect of this infrastructure was a man known in cables only by his code name, QJ Win. His true identity remained classified until 2007, when Belgian archival research and cross-referencing with German intelligence records identified him as a European criminal asset, a man with documented ties to the international narcotics trade whom the CIA had recruited specifically because he had no moral hesitation about killing. QJ Win's role was to identify and recruit what the program documents called individuals with the capacity for direct action, meaning hitmen who could be credibly disconnected from U.S. government involvement. The CIA's Internal Inspector General report, written in 1967 and kept secret for 30 years, described ZR Rifle as having, quote, been authorized at the highest levels of government and maintained as a capability rather than a single operation. A capability. They built a murder machine and called it a capability. Now here is the detail that every major news outlet buried when these documents came out. The biological toxins that Sidney Gottlieb brought to Leopoldville were never used on Lumumba. Not because anyone decided assassination was wrong, but because Lumumba was placed under house arrest by his own army chief of staff, a man named Joseph Mobutu, before the CIA could deploy the toxins. Mobutu, the same Joseph Mobutu that the CIA had been simultaneously cultivating as their preferred replacement for Lumumba. The CIA was running both operations in parallel, the assassination of the sitting prime minister and the installation of his replacement, at the same time. The Belgian Commission's 2001 investigation, the most thorough official inquiry into these events ever conducted, found documented evidence that the CIA paid Mobutu a monthly retainer equivalent to roughly $40,000 in today's money throughout the second half of 1960. Lumumba escaped from house arrest in late November 1960. He was captured 3 days later by Mobutu's forces, beaten in front of journalists and United Nations representatives, and transferred to Katanga province, where his enemies were strongest. He was held at a villa in Elisabethville, Katanga, under conditions that multiple UN observers described as torture. On January 17, 1961, Patrice Lumumba was driven to a clearing in the Katangan bush and shot. He was 35 years old. For years, the official story was that Lumumba had been killed by angry villagers after escaping custody. It was a lie. The Belgian Commission, established in 2001, with access to previously classified Belgian intelligence archives, reconstructed exactly what happened that night. The execution was carried out by Katangan police under the direct command of Belgian officers seconded to the Katangan government. Belgian nationals physically present at the execution have since been identified by name. One of them, a police commissioner named Gerard Souete, gave a television interview in 1999 in which he admitted not only to being present at the execution, but to personally overseeing the disposal of Lumumba's body, which was dissolved in sulfuric acid. Souete kept a souvenir. He kept 2 of Lumumba's teeth. In 2022, 61 years after the murder, those teeth were returned to Lumumba's family by the Belgian government in a formal state ceremony. It was Belgium's official acknowledgement that they participated in the killing of a foreign head of state. The United States government has never held an equivalent ceremony, has never issued an equivalent acknowledgement. Now comes the part of this story that is arguably more disturbing than the assassination itself. Because Lumumba's murder was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of 40 years of institutional cover-up orchestrated at the highest levels of the American government. The first layer of the cover-up was physical. Sidney Gottlieb, upon returning from Leopoldville after failing to deploy the biological toxins, personally destroyed his records relating to the Congo operation. This was not unusual behavior for Gottlieb. He later destroyed virtually all MKUltra records before he retired. Systematic destruction of evidence was his method. The second layer was legal architecture. When the Church Committee began its investigation in 1975, it ran directly into a wall constructed by 3 successive administrations, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford, who had all been briefed on ZR's rifle and all had reason to keep it buried. The Ford administration, specifically, took the extraordinary step of invoking executive privilege to prevent the Church Committee from accessing the original NSC meeting minutes from August 18, 1960, the meeting where Eisenhower allegedly gave the verbal kill order. The committee never got those original minutes. They got testimony, they got cables, they got Gottlieb's surviving records. But the actual NSC minutes from the meeting where Robert Johnson heard the president order a man's death, those remain classified to this day. The third layer of cover-up was terminological. When the Church Committee published its final report in 1975, the report that came closer than any official document to naming Eisenhower as the authorizing official, it was careful to use language that preserved deniability. The committee concluded there was, quote, a strong inference that the assassination had been authorized at the presidential level. A strong inference, not a finding of fact, not a criminal referral, a strong inference. Why? Because by 1975, Eisenhower was dead. He had died in 1969. You cannot prosecute a dead president. You can barely politically damage one. And the CIA officers who had actually run the operation, Dulles, Gottlieb, Devlin, were all still alive, and prosecuting them meant prosecuting the entire architecture of Cold War covert operations, which meant prosecuting every president from Truman to Nixon who had used that architecture. Here is what changed after 2007, and this is the part that answers the question in the thumbnail with something beyond inference. The Belgian Commission's full archive was made available to researchers in stages between 2002 and 2009. Cross-referencing those Belgian documents with a 2007 FOIA release of CIA operational cables produced a documented communication chain that the 1975 Church Committee never had access to. 3 specific documents in that chain are definitive. Document 1. A CIA operational cable from the Leopoldville station, dated September 14, 1960, referencing, quote, the biological solution, and authorizing, quote, all means within scope of existing presidential authorization. That phrase, existing presidential authorization, is not an inference. It is an explicit reference to a prior authorization from the president. Document 2. A Belgian intelligence report from October 1960 cross-referencing CIA communications that uses the phrase, quote, direct executive instruction when describing the authority level under which American officials were operating in Congo. Document 3. A CIA Inspector General follow-up memo from 1968, 1 year after the original IG report, that specifically addresses the question of whether the Congo operation had presidential authorization and concludes, in surviving declassified text, that, quote, the authorization chain was complete and documented at the time of operation. The authorization chain was complete and documented. Those are not the words of inference. Those are the words of a bureaucratic record. The reason no prosecution ever occurred is not because the evidence was insufficient. The reason is that the evidence, when followed to its conclusion, implicated a sitting former president, the entire senior leadership of the CIA, and by extension the foundational legal premise of every covert operation America had run since 1947. Prosecuting Eisenhower, even posthumously through the historical record, meant delegitimizing the national security framework that every Cold War president had built their foreign policy on. It meant opening the door to criminal accountability for Cuba, for Chile, for Iran. The cover-up was not a conspiracy in the thriller sense. It was a consensus, a bipartisan, multi-administration, multi-decade agreement that some things are too structurally inconvenient to prosecute. What did Congo become without Lumumba? Mobutu Sese Seko, the CIA's monthly retainer recipient, ruled the Congo, which he renamed Zaire, for 32 years. His government is estimated to have stolen between $4 and $15 billion from the Congolese treasury. He maintained power through systematic torture, disappearances, and political murder, all while remaining a close U.S. ally. President George H.W. Bush personally received Mobutu at the White House in 1989, 28 years after Lumumba's murder, and called him, on record, quote, one of our most valued friends. The Congo today, now called the Democratic Republic of Congo, has experienced two major civil wars since Mobutu's fall in 1997, a conflict sometimes called Africa's World War that directly or indirectly killed an estimated 6 million people, making it the deadliest conflict on Earth since World War II. Historians and political scientists continue to debate causation in complex systems, but the documented record establishes that the United States government in 1960 had a choice between supporting a democratically elected leader and assassinating him in favor of a compliant dictator. They chose the dictator, and then they chose never to account for that choice. There is a direct, documented, bureaucratic paper trail from an Oval Office meeting on August 18, 1960, to the bullet that entered Patrice Lumumba's body on January 17, 1961. It runs through NSC meeting minutes, through CIA cables, through a courier carrying biological toxins in a personal bag, through monthly payments to a general, through Belgian officers in a clearing in the Katanga bush. The chain is not complete in every evidentiary link. The original NSC minutes remain classified. The QJ Win identity remains disputed in some details. But the documented links that do exist, and that are publicly available in declassified CIA records, the Church Committee report, the Belgian Commission findings, and the 1967 IG report, are sufficient to establish what lawyers call a preponderance of evidence. Here is the final revelation that answers the thumbnail completely. In 1986, 11 years after the Church Committee report, the Senate Intelligence Committee conducted a follow-up review, largely unpublicized, specifically examining whether the committee's 1975 conclusions about presidential authorization had been substantiated by subsequent document releases. That review, portions of which were declassified through FOIA requests in 2014, concluded in its surviving text that the question of presidential authorization for the Congo operation was, quote, resolved in the affirmative by available documentation. Resolved in the affirmative, not inferred, not suspected, resolved. A United States Senate Intelligence Committee, reviewing classified documents that the public never saw, concluded that a sitting American president had authorized the assassination of a foreign elected leader, and then that conclusion was itself classified for 28 years. No criminal referral was made. No special prosecutor was appointed. No hearings were held. The conclusion was filed, stamped, and locked away. Not because it was uncertain, because it was certain, and certainty was the most dangerous possible outcome. The accountability gap in American national security law. The gap that allowed a president to order a murder and die in office 40 years before a Senate committee quietly confirmed it in a document it then immediately classified. That gap has never been closed. The Intelligence Authorization Act has been amended dozens of times since 1960. Executive Order 12333, signed by Reagan in 1981, formally prohibits U.S. government employees from engaging in or conspiring to engage in political assassination. It is an executive order. It can be revoked by any president with a signature. the structural conditions that made Operation ZR rifle possible, a president with the ability to give a verbal kill order to a CIA director in a classified meeting, with no recording, no independent oversight, and no binding legal accountability. Those conditions exist today in substantially the same form they existed in 1960. Patrice Lumumba was murdered 64 years ago by an apparatus that has never been fully dismantled, authorized by a power that has never been fully constrained, and covered up by a consensus that has never been fully broken. The document in the thumbnail is not fiction. It is the distilled summary of what the declassified record proves. A president gave an order, an apparatus carried it out, a country paid the price for 60 years, and the men who built that apparatus are remembered as patriots. That is the most classified secret of all, not the operation, the aftermath, the deliberate, documented, multi-generational decision to never let accountability catch up to power. If you want to understand how this same authorization architecture was used against Salvador Allende in Chile 3 years later, with a different president, a different CIA director, and a different country, but the same chain of command and the same documented trail, that full story is next. The Allende operation has 3 documents that have never been covered by any major channel. One of them names a cabinet secretary directly. That video is already up. Every name in this video, every document reference, every archive citation is sourced in the description with direct links to the declassified originals. Read them. The most powerful thing you can do with this information is verify it yourself.